All right. Hello, everyone. I don't know if there's people are in yet. Feel free to say hi on the Q&A. I'll give it a few more seconds and then we'll crack on. Hello. Hello, Sam. Hello, Stuart and Kim. Oh, this is fun getting hellos from everyone all over my screen. This is cool. Hooray. That's good. Um, all right. Well, I'll tell you what, let's start because we're 2 minutes in. I don't want to waste any much more of your time. Hi, Michael. Um, Welcome to the introduction to virtual production webinar, kind of fireside chat, if you like. I'm with Natascha Farmer and Gary Stubbs. I'll introduce them in a second, but just I suppose a bit of housekeeping, if you like. This is going on for about an hour, and uh, oh, that's nice. Sorry, I'm saying hello. It's going on for about an hour, and we're going to just ultimately go through a bit around virtual production, our experiences in VP, and some pertinent questions and points that come up through VP when planning a shoot or just in general. We have a Q&A tab if you like, so feel free to chuck any questions in there. We'd love to try and answer them as we go along, so don't hold off till the end. And if we don't get to all your questions, we'll endeavour to make sure that we respond to all of them post chat, as it were. So just a little bit around me. I'm a producer for Target 3D and a performance consultant for virtual production and for motion capture and performance capture. So my job a lot of the time is wrangling these jobs in and making sure they get across the line and learning and understanding on some pretty steep learning curves occasionally with VP, which is always the fun part. We have Natascha Farmer, who's a creative and technical lead in virtual production. And we have Gary Stubbs, who's a virtual production assistant director, and both have a wealth of experience and knowledge around VP. So we'll get started. Thank you. I can see a bunch of people already on here. Thank you. So cool. All right. So I'm just going to open this up straight away to both Natascha and Gary. How did you get into VP?
Yeah, well, I can take that one. So basically, my dad was running an AV company, and in COVID, we all had the lockdown. So we started to think about how can we, make events more hybrid. So at the time, I was studying 3D design, and film and TV production. So from there, he had a warehouse with a lot of kit, decided to build a green screen cove, and then I basically got into the Unreal Engine side, the technical side, and then we started to kind of merge with people in TV and film, and they started to bring on clients, and then yeah, kind of built it from there.
Nice. That's pretty much ground up stuff and utilizing that lovely lockdown era we had. Cool. Thank you very much, Natascha. How about you, Gary?
Yeah, mine's a bit different. I obviously everyone saw The Mandalorian. They knew about LED technologies from things like Jungle Book for lighting sources and things like that. And it became this new tool. And obviously, the pandemic really accelerated the use of virtual production for a whole load of productions. It kept productions running. So it was kind of a new tool, which I thought. Um, I want to kind of get my head around and understand where and how we could use it in productions. So my kind of delve into it was more about how we use it, how long does it take to kind of to run a set with virtual production, like where's my downtime's going to be as an assistant director, where am I going to lose time on a production, and just really kind of I want a good grasp of this new technology, what was kind of hitting sort of film and TV.
Yeah, I suppose that's the thing, is this like, for my understanding, well, when I got into it, I suppose it's we see the output of virtual production a lot. So the first thing bringing up is like obviously Mandalorian and Jungle Book and there we see this lovely end result, and it's like, oh, okay, well that's it, and that's all in camera VFX that we've got to this point, and um, the reality obviously is there is a whole lot of stuff that goes before that, and both of you have touched on some key points around game engine just from the offset and and how we build that in, and obviously costing wise and time wise as well. And my experience when I first saw it was a test shoot. And coming from a mocap background, we were trying to put two of those things together. But I suppose for everyone who's listening on this and who may not know this, motion capture can be quite a key element in virtual production in terms of tracking the camera. Uh, so I had my head around that bit, but then we were adding in someone who's driving a character that's going onto the screen, that's interacting with someone in on the actual live set, and they were having a dance off or whatever, and it was super cool and very fun. But there were so many moving parts. It's quite. I think that like in anything, you can become not say overwhelming, but it's quite like crikey. There's okay. Where do I start with this, and how do we go back to that? And I think what I've learned very quickly with this is that it's new tech, but the disciplines and the concept of it isn't new. It's quite it's map drawings, if you like. It's it's just building on from that side of it. So we're just bringing in newer ways of doing it, I guess, as well. So yeah, it's nice to know that from different experiences what we've had from this and different viewpoints, and that's the point as well, right? If you're coming in if this from as a DOP, and you're I suppose you're looking at it thinking, well, I need to be looking at everything I can see on this screen. What and how is this? How are we going to light this? And how are we going to get the best out of this scene early on? And I think that's where one person's looking at it. Obviously, Gary, you're coming from an AD standpoint. It's like, how much time can we utilize for this? Does this need a full day? Have we now got to consider if this weren't using VP and we're going to several locations in a week, we have actually only got 2 days. So how can we do this with virtual production? And then Natascha, from your side, it's the how can we R&D this at the start to get the most out of all of those things to collect
Yeah.
and still build that in. So it's yeah, it's interesting. I suppose for anyone who doesn't know, would one of you mind just giving us your how you would explain VP down the pub to someone? Or the coffee shop, being may not go to pubs, I don't know anymore.
I mean, it's difficult because it kind of, it does use, like you said, a lot of traditional methods, and it's kind of bringing them, into new kind of workflows and doing things quicker. I mean, in-camera VFX is now what everyone's focused on. So seeing real-time keying for a lot of people in itself is a big thing. So I think, yeah, whether you're using an LED wall and you're getting that lighting in camera as opposed to having to do that in post, or you're using virtual production for green screen. I mean, that's the thing as well, is virtual production doesn't just cover an LED volume. A green screen can still be virtual production. If you're getting a live key, that can be considered virtual production. You've now got virtual production techniques that use like an iPhone. So you can do camera tracking in the iPhone and key and do all of that kind of stuff. So I think seeing a kind of real time composite for me is the main upshot of virtual production. That also brings in elements like you can be more creative with it. You can, change things on set, although I'd kind of advise against that, as a creative. I think it's better to kind of address those things on pre-light day. But I think, yeah, in terms of the creativity and flexibility, it also means, a director can kind of see that live and kind of, get a feel for things. Whereas in some cases you would have had to wait, after that post-production process to get that image.
Yeah,
Yeah.
do you think, sorry, I was just saying, do you think in that, and I suppose this is one thing as well that's a consideration and from all sides in this, do you think that um forgive me for any directors who are on this webinar chat, that might be slightly concerning in terms of reduction of creativity. If you think you can, okay, well, I can do everything all in one, I can do multiple setups in 2 or 3 days, and then,
Yeah.
well, now have I lost time? Ergo, am I losing a bit of budget from this shoot? Have I lost that? And do you think that plays into it a bit? Like there's a bit of a worry around that side of it, that the creativity might be lost if you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul, if you like, a little bit?
I mean, if you have too many options and you're
Too many,
expecting,
yeah, too many options, or at the
yeah,
same point, yeah, yeah, definitely,
yeah. L-
definitely too
l-
many options.
No, I mean, like for me personally, so I've been the kind of brain bar, so the person on Unreal Engine, and I've had experiences where I've signed off a load of sets, and then the director has come up on the day, like 10 minutes before the actor's about to come on and said, that's completely wrong. This doesn't look right. Can we change this? And it's like, well, yeah, I can change it quickly. And I'd say if you had that physical set bill, although it's supposed to be signed off, it means that you can't really make those demands. So I'd say, yeah, there's an upside and there's a downside, like you said. Ideally, you want to have all of that stuff signed off well before you get onto the shoot day, because essentially, yeah, you are wasting time. And, the kind of brain bar have a lot of other things and technical things to think about. I'd say that is a massive selling point of VP, is like you can change so much on the day. And I think, yeah, you can, but I definitely say, prepare as much as possible. And that then goes into the fact that a lot of VP productions have to do a lot of work before production, so in pre-production as opposed to in post. All of that kind of gets moved to pre-production, I think.
Yeah, the fix it in post swear phrase is gone, and it's fix it in pre, right? That's probably
Exactly, yeah.
the
Yeah.
and I think there's a real, I mean, there's some questions coming in which I really want to come into, but um, Gary, from your standpoint, from an AD standpoint on this and time, it's not all about time for you guys, but that does always seem to be the thumbprint that's on your heads, as it were. So you're having this opportunity to get everything in pre, if you like. What have you seen what benefits have you seen from that when it's come to
I
principal?
mean, mine's a bit different because I'd kind of used green screen before, and I mean it. I also kind of, as well as being an assistant director, I also work at the University of Sunderland, where they've got great facilities for kind of green screen virtual production, and we have a volume in there. And I'd kind of wanted to spend more time in the volume. So I wanted to do, IC VFX or in-camera visual effects. That was what I want. That's what I've kind of spent the time doing. Although, obviously we do get shoots, externally. We do get shoots where we're using a combination of both on a volume stage. But for me, it was okay. Well, what does it look like? Can we actually shoot from the camera against these LEDs with the final image? I mean, the thing is with Mandalorian, and apologies if anyone's here from Stagecraft who worked on Mandalorian, but with Mandalorian, they kind of shot on the volume on the first Mandalorian, but then had to do a whole load of rotoscope and had to kind of correct a lot of things because the LED technology wasn't there to be able to use that final, the final pixel, if you like. Now we can do that. Now we can, all the volumes I've used, we shoot and that is the final pixel, what ends up on the final, production. And I think the other thing with volumes is demystifying that sort of, it has to be a 3D big environment. I mean, there's something like 40%, 35% of all volume work is kind of car scenes or 2D plates, getting used. The fact that we can go out and shoot 2D plates and we could have the kind of golden hour running 12 hours out of the day because we've got that plate and we're able to put it in the volume. We've got all the dynamic lighting going on, and we can kind of recreate that whole sort of that whole hour for 12 hours out of the day. And it's just figuring out where we could use it and why we're using it. But for me, it was everything in camera for the effects. And I think the other thing is, apart from just the time we can save, rather than having to shoot something over 3 or 4 days, we've got it captured, we can run it and get it all done in a day, is what it's like for the performers as well, what it's like for your talent. So although I absolutely appreciate green screen and we've got previs there, so your talent's coming on and we've got the previs there and we can show them what this is going to look like. If they're kind of walking out and they're walking out onto an LED, big LED volume where the environment's there and they don't have to imagine it, it's kind of there and they can react to what they see rather than, all right, this is going to be this is going to be composted later. I mean, that's like a big selling point for any director, I think, to be able to work with talent who can, who can visualize exactly what's happening in front of them because it's in front of them and they're not kind of imagining it.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the idea as well, isn't it? Of yeah, if my background is originally is in performance consulting, so then that is in acting, and my background is acting. So for me, walking onto a set and going, being kind of like awe-inspired by everything that's going on, or being on location, it's quite a big thing. So if I was, as an example, let's say shooting in some stately home outside, but got rained off for the second half of the day, and then some clever so and so took some 2D plates of that outside area, and then I then come back into an LED stage 2 or 3 weeks later, because we have now that space and we don't have that location again, we can now go into this same location. And as from a performance standpoint, there's a consistency to that as well as it being, if it's yeah, it's more of a consistency in going, okay, I remember this place and I can see this, and oh cool, they took an image of that at the time. And then I suppose to that end, you've still are honoring the traditions of filmmaking on a 2D plate, for example. Not necessarily, it's a bit more flexible with Unreal and sorry, with Game Engine, and using that type and that solution. But for a plate, you still have to light off of what you're seeing as well. So there's still that understanding of that, but you're doing it at an early stage. Um, and you mentioned like bringing, obviously Mandalorian is a big one, but for both of you then who is you currently using, who do you think is using VP, or are we seeing it in more in not just your Disneys and your big kind of blockbusters and stuff? Who else do you think is using it?
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, well, yeah, for me personally, I've used it for architectural visualization, like I said, hybrid events, which is why, I kind of got into it in the first place, documentary filmmaking. We did some stuff and that ended up on Discovery Channel and ITN and that kind of stuff. Live music as well, done some music videos and yeah, live music performances. People are using it for previs, game shows, and also, taking that technology into other outputs like XR outputs, VR games. And I'd say for me, like that's what's most exciting about it is that once you build a 3D set, say in Unreal Engine, you can then use that set for like a VR output, or an augmented reality output. So I think, it isn't just the top end studios anymore, the Hollywood productions that have access to this technology. I think it's all scalable, and you've got people in their bedrooms using a VR headset, Vive trackers and a green cloth, and then you've got the people spending, a lot of money on LED volumes, doing these big productions. So I'd say it's a full range of people, and obviously, as the technology gets cheaper, it's going to become more and more accessible.
We've got to just, this kind of leads into a bit of a question, Natasha, from Stuart and Kim about what the benefits and drawbacks of green screen versus LED walls. So obviously, you've given kind of an example there, but is there anything else that you think that if they're kind of glaring benefits and drawbacks of LED versus VP versus green screen?
I mean, for me personally, I prefer green screen. I think mainly because you can see things like occluding elements in real time quite quickly. You can change a lot of things on the fly. Um, I think, obviously the advantage with an LED volume is you're getting the light off the LED wall, and you have things like for reflections and translucency. That's good. But then, to light a green screen is difficult. There's limitations there, and you need a very good keyer. I've used a lot of software keyers and hardware keyers, and sometimes that can be challenging. So I'd say there's pros and cons to both. It mainly depends on what you're filming. I think the price difference is a big advantage. So yeah.
Yeah, I think for me it's you're right. The kind of shoot on a on a green screen, you're kind of not worried about the sort of transfer into a lot of nodes which need to be used to kind of run each panel and things like that. So we
Yeah.
haven't, there's a little bit less downtime, I guess, in doing that, or setup time. Um, but yeah, I think the for me it's the big sort of selling point is that we're able to use this dynamic lighting, and like I've shot a lot of car scenes, and like we couldn't really do that successfully because of the lighting, to get, if we're using wild walls, so external to our for everyone who's kind of new to it, we've got our main sort of panel wall, if you like, but then we've got walls which can be LED walls, which panels which can be kind of wheeled in, so we can get full reflections on a kind of car. So we wouldn't, and obviously ceiling lighting and things like that. So we're in this full immersive environment for the lighting as well. And yes, we obviously have to add extra lighting where possible, but to be able to do all that and get that light. And I mean, that's, originally that's where this kind of LED technology kind of came from, was for the lighting benefits. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it's yeah, the lighting for me, and shooting on, shooting in camera VFX for me is worked really well. And I think for a lot of people, that's kind of, it feels more like what people are used to, I guess, being on location or being on a different sort of sound stage. That's kind of what people are used to shooting on, or more used
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, and I'd say as well, definitely with an LED wall, you can, that's also scalable. You don't have to have a full volume. You can just use a small section of a wall. We did that. We got a fairly modest sized wall, and then we'd rotate the set so we could get two angles out of it. And that worked perfectly for what we were doing. And it had quite a wide pixel pitch, but it was a documentary, so we just shot really shallow depth of field. So it really depends on your kind of output and what your concept is. I think that's the main thing to get across is it depends on your budget, it depends on what you've got. But yeah, with VP, there's different solutions for everyone. And like you're saying, Gary, definitely seeing that real time effect of the lighting on the subject is immersive, and especially for the actors to see themselves in that environment, that is a big plus. And also there's advances being made with green screen technology. I saw someone has developed something that matches physical lights within your green screen studio to Unreal Engine. So it will actually change the light to match the lighting in Unreal Engine. So you can kind of perfectly immerse the person within the virtual scene. So I think yeah, the way the technology is changing, there's going to be pros and cons to both. But another thing I'd say is VP is constantly in flux, and especially now with the advancements in the technology, it's all getting quicker and quicker. So I think I think yeah, it will be a different conversation in a few months, I'm sure, but it really just depends on your project.
I think, yeah, you mentioned. Oh, sorry, Gary, you go.
I was going to say, going back to your question about who's using it. I mean, I think, like Natasha said, it's getting used pretty much everywhere, from advertisements to, and this is, not necessarily massive budgets. So advertisements. I mean, so I do work for Coronation Street, and Lee Rayner, who's head production of Coronation Street, he, like many people, had seen The Mandalorian and thought this is great technology. And Coronation Street views it a few times, and Coronation Street budgets aren't Mandalorian budgets, but they've used it. They've used it a number of times now for different sort of scenes. So yeah, I mean, it's getting, yeah. It's, the thing is, if you watch a program and you go, that looks like volume, they probably haven't done a very good job. But I think, it's like any effects. You don't want the audience to know it's an effect, and hopefully, we do that, fairly successfully, so people watching at home don't realize that they're in a volume, or how it's been done. But yeah, I think just the scale of the scalability of a volume and what you want to do. So there's a calculation of something like, if you're shooting for more than 12 weeks, it's worth kind of making a pop-up volume, getting the stage and bringing in a pop-up volume. But it just depends on the production, right down to using a small wall for kind of background of the car or whatever. So I think it all depends on the production, and I think a lot of the questions might be, well, yes, Mandalorian can afford it because it's Disney, But no, like adverts can do it. David Attenborough's last sort of series, they used it for some dinosaur things on that. Yeah, it doesn't have to be. I think demystifying that thought of it has to be this big budget production to use a volume, or it has to be sci-fi. Like, absolutely not, like we've mentioned 2D plates and shooting on 2D plates. The full 3D, like like a lot of Mandalorian stuff was full 3D. But then you've got that mixture of the two. So we also have something called 2.5D. So something like Bullet Train, people who've seen Bullet Train, that was a mixture of 2.5 and some 3D. But that was there was a lot of plates kind of used in that which were 2.5. So again, it all depends on the production, and it's a lot of it's just looking at that script and going, actually, you know what, like we could do a lot of this on a volume, and yes, there's going to be some location. So the other thing with volumes, especially for car scenes, is we can be absolutely creative. We'll shoot some wider plates on the location, but then when we're shooting in like the kind of close-up car scenes, we can be really creative with cameras. What you just couldn't do on a location. You couldn't kind of take that crane cam through a car, through a window, through the next window, and it's about being more creative as well as a whole other benefits as well.
Yeah, and that's I suppose it leads into the idea and going and slightly rewinding a little bit with this, but it still feeds into it is um the evolution of this tech is yeah, it's still going and still going. So you mentioned earlier, Natasha, about pixel pitch. So the distance between the pixels on the LED wall and what that means to the camera, for those who aren't sure, is that the further it means that you, depending on how far away each pixel is to each other, is how the distance the camera can be to the wall. Now, the closer you get to the wall, the more you start seeing the actual wall for what it is, and so if we went back to like 2018, maybe I think that a decent pixel pitch was about 7 to 8 mil. I'm loath to bring up another Star Wars reference, but that was on like Rogue One, and then I think now we're kind of everyone's sitting comfortably around 2, maybe just under 2 mil. So that means and again it comes back to this idea, and there's a few questions I think just coming up around. We'll talk about costs and stuff, but that is something that does have a knock-on effect in the sense that if we're doing these close-ups and we have a smaller volume, or we're getting creative with what we're using outside of the frustum, the frame that the camera's seeing, is it means that we can get closer. I mean, we can use the rest of the wall, or we can use another wall, or we can bring bring other lights in, so we can get closer and get the most out of that space as well. So it's because of that change. It means there's a knock-on effect to other changes. But I suppose the question that comes up, and there's a few, and I will address some of these on here as well. By the way, everyone who's listening and watching, but it might get answered as well in this, is that would you say then it's cheaper? I know it's a kind of a rough word to use on this, but is the budget limitations, or is the fruit worth the squeeze, as it were, for VP, or is it better to do things, say, on location, or to do things? I mean, I suppose, before I'm double barreling questions here, but green screen versus LED wall, as Natasha, you said, that can be done in-house and has been done for many moons. So is LED VP a cheaper solution in the long run? What do you think?
I
Either.
mean, I mean, yeah, it is difficult to say. I mean, like you said, green screen technology has been done for a long time, but we are seeing the live composite in through a live feed. So you do have the live image essentially, and we used an LED wall for a shoot that was something like 20 odd locations, and we shot it over 5 days. And I know definitely for that client, they just said to do this on location would have been so much more expensive, and like the logistics of it would have just been a nightmare. So I think in some use cases, yeah, it must be cheaper. But then in other use cases, maybe not. It's like if you're shooting on one location, maybe it would not be as cost effective. I'm not sure. But then, yeah, it's going back to that thing as well of, studios have different prices, they have different packages and solutions, and it is scalable. Yeah.
That's
I
oh,
would. I
go
was
for
going
it.
to say, Ryan. I think when I very first started looking at this, I mean, my first kind of experience with it was a production park, and my first questions was, this is great, but how much is it? How much is it going to cost to use? And I've got to say, I mean, I've shot in a couple of volumes in London, a couple of in the north, and I've got to be honest, everyone I've spoke to who run the facilities do say there's deals to be done. So I think, if you can be flexible with time, if you can kind of do it, there is deals to be done. I've never heard anyone go, this is our set rate and we're not going to budge from this. There's all, like locations, like everything, there is kind of deals to be done on it. But I think the important thing to kind of think about is it's not just about the cost. There's some other benefits as well, which I think is absolutely necessary to talk about. So, when we're looking at things like a sustainable production for, BAFTA Albert certifications, the fact that we're shooting in there's calculations depending on what volume you're using. They'll have a calculation of what the kind of energy consumption is, so you can put it into your carbon calculator for Albert. But yeah, so we've got the sustainability side to think about. The fact that we're not taking a whole load of crew out, we can shoot with quite low. I mean, we might shoot plates initially, but then we're kind of working with kind of potentially low number crew, which obviously impacts everything in terms of the carbon footprint for the production. But then there's also the health and safety side. So one of the things that we were shooting was it was on a rooftop. Now, to take people up to a rooftop and shoot on a rooftop um, is dangerous. Is like it's an AD's worst nightmare to go, all right, we're going to shoot on this rooftop, or we're going to shoot on top of this building. It's like, yeah, okay, there's a lot that can go wrong. And it's shooting at night, more complicated, like whole load of issues. But we can go, all right, well, let's take that into a volume. Let's, dress it. We might go to the location, take some pictures and whatever else we need to be able to kind of replicate the location. But the fact that we're in a studio, we're nice and safe, not too much can go wrong, is there's more than just the cost benefit for virtual production. And that's where, when you're looking at it from an AD or from a producing side, you kind of go, actually, if we can do it for the same price, then we'll do it. A lot of the time you can do it cheaper. You're using a lot less people to kind of go and do that shoot. Obviously, I'm talking mainly about dramas here, but it goes across the board for different for different genres as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, yeah. I think yeah, and I suppose the everything feels like it has a knock-on effect with that as well. So uh, there's probably a lot of people that go, "Oh, great sustainability, we're using less crew," and then there's someone going, "Wait a minute, I'm going to lose a job to this." Then, and that's not necessarily the case. But no, the and I think the sentiment of this then is, at least I feel like this, and I feel quite passionate about the idea of planning and fixing things in pre, as I said earlier, in the sense that there's a buy-in to that, and I think when you get everyone on board, then you see that, and it's like, okay, we're sending a couple of people out to get plates, and there's been a few questions around plates, and I really want to address them actually on here now, but coming back and then bringing them into the volume, and then yeah, and then or in fact, I've had this. I've working with a director recently who wanted to shoot um, in three disciplines, if you like, in one shoot. So he was using a game engine for one of the setups, and then for and it was talking head stuff. So it was like kind of to camera, and then he would go in to use a plate using disguise, and then he would go back to using, and then he would go back to using green, and almost on every of the takes he would do a green version of it as well. So, and I think that was just going, that was more someone going, I want to try and do what I can do in here, rather than this is the functionality. So it goes back to, what are you using that for? And the cost is, if you're going, I'm just doing this to see what happens, if I can, what I can get out of it. And that kind of harks back to the general ethos and idea of filmmaking in general, right? Is to see what art we can make and stuff. Um, just a couple of things regarding. So I think someone's just double checking some questions as we're going on this one. So Jonathan's popped down earlier, what is the demand of 2D plates compared with creating realistic 3D versions in 3D software? Is one better than the other? Uh, I'm just going to start this off with saying that they're different, and I find in that instance the good thing about that is that they have different like measures to them. So if you're doing something on a 2D plate or a 2.5D plate, we were saying just before this started that you're still under the rules of traditional filmmaking a bit more because you can't manipulate or play with as many assets or light and as much as you can with, say, a virtual environment using game engines, so using something from Unreal Engine that you can build yourself. So for me, I think it's almost like looking at a studio shoot versus a daytime shoot versus a nighttime shoot sometimes. I think they have different qualities to them. I love both personally. I love player shoots in a studio. I think there's something fun about it and something that's quite alive about it. I love the flexibility and the demand and the challenges that come with shooting on Unreal. But I'd love to hear from both you guys.
I think it depends on the shot that you need. So it depends on the parallax as well. So obviously, if you're kind of working with parallax, which obviously is kind of changing the perspective. Obviously, on a 2D image, we can't change perspective. That's where we bring in 2.5D. So we might have a 2D image plate, and then a 3D object if we need to kind of move around that object. So on Bullet Train, for example, background. For anyone who hasn't seen, it all takes place on a train. And obviously we've got the set of the train, so that's a real set. The back right far background, that's a 2D plate, which was constructed, and then some of the buildings nearer were 3D because when the train passes, if the parallax changes, we need that sort of in there. So again, the 2D plates brilliant for car scenes. I don't think I've ever used a 3D or a 2.5D plate on a car scene. Everything's been 2D. It depends what the director's vision is for that scene, and that will kind of dictate whether or not you need a 2D plate, a 2.5, or a 3D environment. For me, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'd agree with all those points. And obviously, I'm mainly, 3D. But what I would say also is a big limitation of 3D is trying to get those high quality assets on a wall to run at something like 120 FPS is a bit of a nightmare. It does require a lot of technical attention. So I can imagine that going down the 2D or the 2.5D route could be more cost effective and just less of a headache in terms of, technicality. And I'd say as well, there's companies like Kubrick AI, which creates, a segmented plate, a 2.5D kind of plate from a single image. So, and also generating images with AI, that can often be a route to go down. So yeah, I'd say yeah, all those things. Yeah.
That's a perfect segue from Jonathan, who just asked, "Do you see AI as a threat or to VP or a help?" So in this instance, I suppose it's a help, right, with Kubrick and
Yeah, I mean, look, AI is a difficult subject. I think whether I see it as a threat, I definitely think that the crews are getting smaller, and I think in my personal experience, it is kind of good that AI is offering options for people with less budget and smaller companies to experiment with this technology and not necessarily have, an Unreal Engine artist who can create these 3D assets. It means you can develop things on the fly. But Gary, like you said, whether a 2D output is enough for a certain project, whether you need parallax, that can become an issue unless you're using 2.5D. So yeah, I'd say that I think it's interesting. Also, things like Gaussian splats are becoming quite a topic within virtual production. I'm working with a company, Jet Set Lightcraft, and they do all the virtual production within an iPhone. So the iPhone is the camera tracker, which can then connect to a cinema camera, and they're using AI rotomats and 2.5D AI plates, and they're now looking at incorporating Gaussian splats. So taking a 3D Unreal environment, creating a Gaussian splat out of that, and then pushing it into an iPhone. So the models are really lightweight, and you can literally just see a preview that would be as good in Unreal within your iPhone and see that person keyed using an AI mat. You don't even have to have a green screen. So this technology is, yeah, becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. That's all in development. There's still problems with Gaussian splats. It's not 100% there, but I do think that within time we will get there. And I'd say that about AI as well. At the minute, there are a lot of problems. It isn't just a fix all. It's very difficult to art direct specifically, and it isn't just like, you click your fingers and you get exactly what you want. But I think, yeah, the truth is, it's like I've been told my job may be obsolete in a year's time. But I think, for me personally, it's about adapting, taking on that new technology because it's here to stay. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. And just trying to get on board with it and see, okay, well, how is this going to change my job? How can I make myself useful? If it can take away some of the headache, then by all means, let's go with that. But yeah, it's definitely becoming more and more prevalent within VP. So
Yeah, and yeah, yeah. I've got images of people's iPhones melting to their hands because of course flats now. So can't cope. Um, there's a few questions that kind of been answered, and there's a few around just virtual production in location outside of and how people get into VP. Not necessarily in the within the M25. So to answer that question, obviously. I mean I live south of the Watford Gap and I live far far west so but the outside of London in the northeast you have obviously have the proto you've got the stage up there in VP stage up there in Sunderland have got the stage as well so um in terms of multiple like uses of where you can find stages, they're not just confined to central London. In fact, if to be really honest, like that whole thing around that, it's more of a unique selling point to have a VP stage in the middle of London than it is to have one anywhere else. If they're popping up outside of those broadcasting areas, and obviously Pinewood is West Greater London, but there are still VP stages that are kind of pushing out, and a lot of we were talking about this earlier. Just a lot of universities will either hire spaces or they'll invest in building them in themselves. But to that end, though, those VP stages and any VP stage, if you look at the larger VP stages like your Mars VP stage and the we were talking in the sense earlier about this just before it's literally minutes before we started around use cases for virtual production stages and it might be that you for going back to cost and negotiating that budget around when how often you would use that stage you may use it one for your big tech viz like setups and ones for stunt viz setups and stuff where cars are crashing or people are falling off buildings and stuff but for those pickups and those other parts those other VP stages are those smaller ones are great because you can be in and out in half a day if with given the right I'm saying that very easy like it's that easy it's not that easy but with a pre-light you could be doing everything in half a day rather than spending less and that's the point I guess um just a quick one just around the picking up getting plates because obviously keep seeing this from Robert McDougall yeah the it's you can take still images for plates you don't if you don't have a budget for LiDAR, for example, if you said, yeah, taking those images is still achievable on there, and that's and for photogrammetry, so for like the virtual art department, which we've not touched massively on in terms of how we match the virtual art, the environment with the actual kind of set dressing in the art department on the stage, but for photogrammetry and things like that, you can only try and you can only use it and see what happens, right? That's the key thing is, and you can factor that into your budget and see how would that work, and that's why we have pre-lights and that's why we have test days and that's why we, you know, for anything I think, and feel free, Natasha and Gary, to chime in on this. In terms of VP, this fixing pre thing I keep saying is that the idea is if you wanted to learn that how to do that photogrammetry and you get an app that's 30 quid or whatever it is to take a lot of images of assets that you know that you've seen in the scene that you want in your Unreal environment, or you want to have that as your hero kind of assets, if you like. Learning all that side, especially with Unreal, isn't it takes time, but it's not it's in fact, if anything, it's free to learn Unreal. So that part of it is that pre part of it should spark that creativity as well to take it into the next steps, I think. But love to hear from Gary and Natascha around that.
Go on, Natascha.
Yeah, well, I'd say that yes, Unreal Engine is free and you can go down that route again, Ryan. It's just having the time, and I'd say there are so many different things to look at technically. And Unreal Engine is a bit of a rabbit hole because it is a games engine. There's a lot to look at in terms of the correct render settings using Lumen, all that kind of stuff. Like I said, optimization to get it running on an LED stage, or even, in some kind of middleware if you're using green screen. But then, yeah, there are apps that you can get, on the iPhone where you can take HDRIs, Gaussian splats, do photogrammetry or LiDAR, or on the iPad, and I'd say, yeah, previs is your friend. You can't ignore it. I'd say that's really where you have to have everything planned. And I'd say as well, when we talk about previs, for me, it's no use to just have a drawing like a storyboard. It's useful to go into Unreal Engine and have a dummy, to represent the actor or the subject, and then because in Unreal Engine you can use such accurate camera lenses and use those to kind of plan out your shots exactly to the T with the camera with the correct lens, and then you can, yeah, have a brilliant understanding of exactly what it's going to look like in physical relation to the stage and how much space you have as well. I'd say with LED walls, you realize quite quickly, like we did with only a fairly modest wall, oh, actually, we don't have that much space to play with. So doing all of that in the previs is definitely important. And, now before every shoot, it's like, I will spend so much time planning that out. And then when you get to the shoot day, you know what the lighting's going to look like, where the person's going to be, how much physical space you have to play with. And another thing I'd say, which is really something to consider, is blocking for the actors. That's been a massive problem, shooting on green screen. That has been difficult, especially when you're trying to pull a good key. So I'd say previs helps massively with all of that.
Yeah, go for
I would agree, Natascha. And I would say, I mean, for people who haven't used it before, when I first started kind of looking into it and started doing a little bit of training around it, it was surprising how many people were doing training from art departments. So we've now got our virtual art department kind of, instead of being right at the end, they might already kind of be working on doing some previs, and a lot of those elements from your previs now will come right into pre-production. So,
Yeah.
and obviously I know Natascha and Ryan, but for anyone else, your elements, what you'd normally sort of maybe kind of construct in the sort of post environment, you're taking a lot of those elements now and you bring them forward, especially if it's like a 3D sort of Unreal sort of shoot that you're working on. Those elements are coming forward now. And even things like props now, art departments are scanning, LiDAR scanning props and bringing those in as well. And with the 2D plate, with the background plates, there's companies which will there's companies which will provide you with certain plates already stitched together. So we've got like driving plates and things where you can literally I'll not mention too many kind of manufacturers who do this, but there's companies set up who already have a stock of driving through central London at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Or you can hire these companies to go out. If you've got the budget, you can hire a company to go out and shoot exactly the time of day, exactly the kind of the route you want them to do, and they'll do that and they'll put those plates together. But as well as that, we've also got photogrammetry departments. So on anything like Marvel and Lucasfilm now, they're pretty much everything they construct. They'll have a LiDAR. They'll have a photogrammetry department who just, because it costs so much to build, they'll LiDAR scan their environments so that if we need to go back into a volume and do pickups or anything, we've got them. We don't have to go back to Scotland or wherever it is that we're shooting and kind of redo stuff. So yeah, I mean, the plates and the background, like the technology is changing massively. And I think an important point is the fact that now the technology allows us to have these ghost frames on volumes where we can record the green screen at the same time as we're recording the in-camera effect. And they're kind of there's like Sony and a couple of other manufacturers are looking into other ways where we can shoot multicam, because at the moment, anyone who kind of uses multicam, we can cheat it sometimes. And I mean, all the cameras I've used are kind of global shutter cameras, so like the RE35s and Venice and things like that. And I mean, they're expensive cameras, but we can only fit two on, if you like. Normally, if we can cheat it a little bit, but the technology's changing that much that pretty soon I think we're going to be able to do this multicam shoot if that's the kind of production that you want to do as well. So I think things are changing massively.
Yeah, and it's yeah, I'm just in my head now thinking about how that would work on literally splitting the wall in. Well, which you would do anyway, but yeah, yeah, on a decent curve of a wall, yeah, you could definitely do it. Yeah, man, no, yeah, I don't want to go into my brain thinking of how I do that hypothetical. But interesting about like virtual art department and things. To bring this up, it's also you don't know what happens when something goes on set with costumes. So a really good example of this was and this was just a student, not just a student. This was a learning experience for some students in VP, and um, they had set it up to look like a church, and they had this whole setup like a church. And they'd gone into their costume department. And they found an old chainmail vest and arm. Now that's great, and it looked great. But the moment that thing got anywhere, like as if the actor got too close to the wall or just on the edge of the wall, the reflection on the chainmail instantly created moire, and it was the weirdest effect. It was super cool, but it was a nightmare to go. This is not what we're trying to show you how it works, and so we had to like really scrub it up and make it look as dirty as possible just to avoid that, that side of it. Or I didn't, the learners did, as it were. So I guess just, and I'm aware of time, and there are some really cool questions on here. And I want to focus on them a little bit. One of the questions just from Graham has said, in terms of in-camera VFX, are you seeing industry using end display for your 3D workflow, or relying on media servers? And then the second follow-up on that is, what media servers do we use for 2D and 2.5D workflows? That's a very specific one, but I suppose in my experience, we use end display configs or we would require that rather than you. Well, it depends on the job. I mean, I suppose is the answer to that for me. But Gary and Natasha, if you've got any experience from,
Yeah, I think depends on the studio like shooting at, because
yeah,
some people use end displays, some people, there's another couple of bits of software which people kind of use, one which is very expensive. So I think it depends on the studio that you're shooting at. I think ultimately it doesn't matter how the image is getting on the screen from my point of view, because I never wanted to go into all the technology behind it, although I've ended up kind of doing that and knowing a little bit more than I thought I needed to know, because I just wanted to do it from a creative filmmaking point of view. But so, I kind of have gone into it a little bit more and learned a little bit more of Unreal, just so I know what's capable, I guess. But I think ultimately, whatever means they're using to put it onto the volume, for me, as long as it does the job what we need it to do, I'm not worried kind of how what they're using to get there, whether it's end display or anything else.
yeah, I think if I see it, yeah, you're absolutely right. And also it comes down to, I suppose, the testing on that. If you're using an end display config. This isn't not slapping wrists or anything, but the one thing that is a bit of a bugbear from ours is if we go, oh, we're using this, and then you realise that their end display configuration is set in the wrong version or something like that, and then they've not taken into account that actually our wall is two render nodes, that are two computers that are running the wall, or three or whatever, depending what it is. So it's that always that again, it comes back to that pre side. How about you, Natasha?
Yeah, I mean, personally, we've used end display and had no problems with that. And also, gone to other LED volume studios where they're using things like Disguise there's a lot of different options out there, but I'd say mainly it just depends on the project.
Is there any just the last question for the last few minutes, just going back to our ones on here. Any kind of misconceptions do you think so it doesn't have to be a technical thing, just in general regarding VP that you think comes up quite a lot that you almost like you have to kind of say negotiate the answer around maybe.
Um, I mean, yeah, I'd say the biggest misconception is that, you know, it's only for people with a huge budget. I'd say it definitely is scalable. Technology is, democratized and becoming more and more democratized. Um, and I'd also say that I think my biggest concern is that it's so tech heavy. And I can imagine if I was coming into VP now, the conversation around it is just so, um, yeah, it's all about the hardware and the software, and there's so many different elements to it. I imagine I'd find it extremely overwhelming. But I'd say that there are solutions that just require, the latest iPhone, and that can still be virtual production. So I'd say that in terms of having like a big crew, a big budget, a big stage, that's not the only way to do it. You can do it by yourself essentially, and that's still virtual production. It just depends on the level of output that you need for the client, for the project. Um, and yeah, I'd say that's the biggest misconception. Also that it's only for sci-fi. It's used for drama. We've used it for documentaries, sit-down documentaries, which was really good. That really lent itself to the process, and also we use solutions like back projection. Using a strong enough projector instead of an LED wall, and that comes with its pros and cons. So I'd say yeah, you can kind of do it with a projector that you've got lying around at home and a white sheet. So I think it's just being creative with it and seeing what technique works best for you. But it is all, you do have to kind of have the time to put into the R&D phase, and really think about what do we want to put out? What is our project? So yeah, I'd say it's definitely scalable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I would agree, Natasha. I think the thing is, it's not just the main thing is it's not just for big budgets. It's for I'd say almost any size reasonable sort of production budget. And I think just understanding that if you're going in there to shoot as a production, every volume I've been in has a really good sort of technical team attached to it. They don't. I think I've spoke to a couple of volumes where they've tried to do a dry hire or initially thought we'll dry hire. Dry hire doesn't work because the people running these systems are very technical, normally from an animation or games background, and they are part of the crew. But when you're going into a volume, so any producers out there who's thinking about using a volume, you're going into a space which is generally really well teched, and it's obviously there's negotiations from heads of department on different aspects of your art department will be massively involved, your cinema, like everyone from all those departments can speak to the people who are running these volumes, but you're wet hiring it. Okay, so you're not having to generally employ like someone to run brain bars and whatever else. You're going into a facility which, in my experience, is already kitted out with the right staff who are running it, and you're using it and hiring it as a facility. And I think that's the important thing. You're not sort of having to retrain a lot of your staff on this. I think just if you get heads of department, for anyone who's got production coming up, there's a whole load of training around all over the country for virtual production. Definitely get people kind of get people skilled up with the understanding of what they need to do for their particular area. But yeah, it's at the end of the day, this is just another production tool. It happens to be a really good one in the right places, but it is just another production tool. But it's just like when you do a production, will we shoot on a volume? Will we shoot on location? Is it a mixture of the two? That's what you've got to think about.
Cool. Thank you ever so much, Gary and Natasha, for spilling your brains all over virtual production for the last hour. It's been really, really helpful, and it's been really nice to just bounce up some ideas and get some new understanding of some new solutions or some old solutions that are coming in. So thank you very much for sharing your time this morning to introduce us all to a bit more about VP. And thank you to all the lovely people that have asked questions and all the ones that have listened. And hopefully you've got something out of all of this. And I think there is a link on the chat from AMP Events just for the sign up and just to answer some survey or answer the survey. So please do that. But we'd love to obviously bring some more kind of finite ones as well over and hopefully get Gary and Natascha back for some chats on some specifics later down the line. But for now, thank you very much, and I hope you have a lovely lunchtime. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.